Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer who is passionate about helping all of us to use the difficult things and adversity in our life to grow and show up as the best version of ourselves. Aaron Bender is here with me today.
We have got a guy on the episode today, Justin Schuman, all about authenticity and just bearing your soul and sharing your life. And you're
online. I think he
Yes.
talks about it specifically online in social media.
And you're very active on Instagram. You share a lot. Is there a line, though, that you will not cross?
That's interesting. Do I share a lot?
You do, yes.
But do you really, Aaron, from my Instagram, do you really know what kind of life I live?
That's, you know what, that's tough. That, you bring up a good point. Because
Yeah.
we know attorney Holly.
Right.
We know, how should I put this?
Because
Super famous, awesome Holly.
Oh my gosh.
No, but yeah, so we know the brand that is Holly, but do we know the person?
Right. I mean, yeah. And I would venture to say you don't, which maybe Justin is going to be like, bust it out, girl. Come on. But I do have very specific barriers. I do not post certain things ever. Very intentionally. And ironically, the things that I won't post about are actually maybe the biggest parts of my life. And so I don't know, it's going to be an interesting discussion because, he's from what I've seen in prepping for the episode, Justin is really in favor of authenticity, but does that mean you just have to bare your soul in every aspect of your life? I don't know. I'm going to ask him. We have Justin Schuman. He's got human right in his name on the show today. Justin is a Broadway actor, photographer, storyteller, business owner, and neurodivergent empath. Justin, I wish you would just do more with your life.
Hearing my bios read to me is like a unique circle of hell that I live in frequently because I do these things. And it does make me feel like, wow, I do a lot. And at the same time, why don't I feel that productive? So yeah, it's a conversation I'll bring to my therapist. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right, yes. Okay, so Justin, you, clearly you do lots of different things. But I was looking at some of your content on Instagram in preparation for the show, and you have great content, by the way. Love it. And I think it's probably messaging that we all need to hear. But specifically, you talk about sort of showing up in this really authentic way, specifically on social media. But I think you could probably apply that to just showing up in life, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us, how did you start doing this work where you're really helping people to be more authentic?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's so this traces back to when I was on Broadway. I was doing Tina, the Tina Turner musical, which was such a joy. We were open from 2019 to 2022. So the pandemic, we hit pause and then we reopened, which was, again, such a cool experience to be on Broadway pre and post. And there was a moment somewhere into the run, and I was a swing. So swing is an offstage cover that gets very little notice occasionally that you have to be in the show. And I realized that, the 54th production or, performance I was doing, where I walked into the theater and at half hour, they were like, you're going on for this person. And I was like, okay, that the things I was most concerned about were my props and my costume changes and whatever, but not about actually living truthfully on the stage, about being a person. And I was like, oh wow, that's so ingrained in me. I have the training, I've done this for a long time. I feel very comfortable in my body and expressing in that way. And I kind of wondered if there was a transferability of that skill set to real people who were not actors, who were not professional storytellers. Yeah. And it started there. And so I brought it onto social media, really just talking about being yourself, building a business. I started my photography business really as as an expression of myself. And I one of the earlier taglines was how to make six figures just by being yourself. A little clickbaity, but I was always aiming to make good on the promise, which was, if you can really build a community and form a bond of trust with a large swath of people and you have something they need, it's actually not that hard to make money, especially if you do it ethically and with integrity and like a good person ought to. Yeah. And very early on, people started saying, I don't know how to make content, though. I don't know what to talk about. I have too many ideas. And so I learned very quickly it actually wasn't about the content at all. It was people had no idea who they were. And then when you show up on camera, this thing that really makes you feel like you need to step into this better than yourself version of you, well, 10 times 0 is still 0. And I found that people really needed a helping hand in terms of doing some of that exploration. And so it definitely is not therapy, and it's definitely not life coaching, but it definitely feels a lot like helping people to digest their lived experiences and then understand how to express from a place that feels really somatically, truthfully embodied. And so I try to make it feel as actionable as possible. And in that way, like you pointed out, the skill set that I hope people hone on social absolutely translates to real life.
A prenuptial agreement, or sometimes called a premarital agreement, is an agreement that two parties enter into before they get married that basically chooses to deviate from state law. It assigns rights and responsibilities regarding assets and debts that are acquired during the marriage. Some common misconceptions about prenups are, one, that they basically doom the marriage to failure, or that it's really planning to divorce, and neither of those things are true. But the real value of a prenup is talking about and creating rules around how the things that you acquire during the marriage are going to be characterized. A prenup can protect things like art collections, real estate portfolios, businesses, all those types of assets. The ideal timeline to get a prenup is not 2 weeks before the wedding. The final version of a prenup has to be presented to the parties 7 days before they actually sign it. So there's like a 7-day waiting period. As soon as you get engaged, you should seek a lawyer's advice and counsel on a prenup and start the process then, because the closer the prenup is signed to the wedding, the more likely that the court is going to think there was some sort of duress involved in that person signing it, and they have to prove that the prenup was signed voluntarily in order for them to be enforced. At Moore Family Law Group, we represent a lot of high-profile people, celebrities, professional athletes, business tycoons. If you already have a lot of assets, or you think you're going to be acquiring a lot of assets during your marriage, we are the best ones to protect that for you and help you make your marriage stronger. Call Moore Family Law Group today.
It feels kind of ironic that you're a trained actor, which is like, you are trained to learn how to portray something that is not you, right? How have you reconciled that?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful question, and I think it also goes back to how do you define acting, right? Like Stanislavski would say, it's living truthfully under imaginary circumstances, and I think that first part is so important, right? It's living truthfully. And so it's actually one's own access to their honesty, to their truth, that I think is most important. It's then a willingness to communicate in a way, through a lens, the character perhaps, that is not hiding possibly the worst or the dirtiest or the most grotesque parts of yourself, but being willing to share and to be seen such that you can help an audience to see themselves more clearly. And so I think actually, maybe it's not ironic, maybe it's so fated, actually.
Right,
that somebody
yeah,
who,
it's serendipitous, yeah.
yeah,
Wow,
and at the same
that.
time, like, I'll totally claim credit. Like, I really do feel like I've built something for myself that exists at the intersection of all the things I've always been good at, and simultaneously, and this feeds into the work a lot, the things I had apologized for as well. I mean, I will totally step outside myself and I'm a words boy. I'm a speaker, I'm a talker, I love it. And I've always talked too much. I've always been too much. I've always been the boy who knows it all. And those have been problems in my past. Those aren't problems, at least not for me, maybe for the people I was around. And now I've made good on them and help a lot of people daily with those skills.
Yes, you've leveraged it. You've basically turned what was once maybe shameful into power. That's amazing.
1,000%. And I love the way you express that. And additionally, it's like so many of my clients have experienced a great deal of trauma from little t to big T. And I think that at the end of the day, if we're looking at you get one life, and if you're going to experience trauma, then it's on you to heal, sure, but then it's also on you to get to decide what you do with that experience. And if you want to share that story and help people, awesome. And if you want to benefit from the sharing of that story, I think you deserve to do that too. I think there's a healthy amount of selfishness in what I do, perhaps what you do. I don't know so much, but I mean, I'm on your podcast, which clearly means that you understand the really should be thoughtful productization of self, right? Like this is an aspect
Yeah.
of what we do when you're creating a public brand to be consumed. But then you have the autonomy to do with your story what you please, and I think that's so important.
Right. Okay, so speaking of your story, all of our stories, and the the life experiences that we've all endured or been through, some of the traumas, things like that. When you talk about showing up in an authentic way, in any sort of medium, social media, real life, whatever the case may be, if we had another guest on the show, Allison Forgale, she's the author of a book called Likeable Badass, and she kind of talked about the reality where it's like we all have different aspects to ourselves, right? Like, if somebody asks you how you're doing, you can choose to say like, oh, I'm doing great, thank you. Like, how are you? Because that could be true. Like, I am doing great in some sort of aspects. You could also choose to share that like, well, I didn't sleep at all last night and I'm barely hanging on and I've had 4 coffee, like that's also true. So in this concept of like sharing your story and being authentic, like where is the line? How much do we share? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, really just like letting that sit for a second. I think that's, to be honest, like what I just did, I think is important, right? Like you asked me a question, the question is about a question, and I could spout off an answer without even feeling into it for a second and just like give you off the top of my head an intellectual sort of response. Lately for me, I'm trying my hardest to come from what I'm feeling and what my body's experiencing, because I find just because I'm fast and witty and smart doesn't mean that's always the most accurate reflection of what I really feel. And I think that's actually the answer to the question. It's important to speak transparently and candidly as a reflection of what you're really thinking and feeling, covered by the notion that you get to share candidly and transparently whatever you want to share. Boundaries are really important. And one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, I'm afraid of oversharing. How will I know if I do? And I'll be super honest, it always catches me off guard because I'm like, if I blindfolded you and guided you to the edge of a cliff and stepped away from you, you would know you should not take one more step. Your body would tell you, you would feel the gust of air, you would know even though you couldn't see it. And I think people don't give themselves enough credit for having an internal sense of where their boundaries might be, or, yeah, that story feels a bit too spiky or a bit too angular, or maybe treads into territory that it's no longer my story to share. A very messy, chaotic metaphor I once came up with is like taking a very spiky cactus and like dipping it in a vat of mayonnaise. So if you do want to share like a potentially puncturing story of yours, you can also sand it down just a bit for the consumption of others, but there should be a reason that you did that, right? Hopefully not out of fear, hopefully from a place of agency. But I think that the short answer to your question, as I tend to verbosely, circuitously land the plane.
You have one of the best vocabularies I've ever heard, by the way.
Thanks. My parents will be so thrilled. We were a talking household, so that's good.
Yes.
But I think that the doing anything, answering how are you, on purpose and with intention, and that's the real answer. Whatever you share, however much you choose to share, doing it from a place of choice as opposed to, oh, I'm good, out of habit or out of the reflexive need to not take up too much space in the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanna really I wanna kind of focus on 2 things. One is when you took the moment to pause and think, because when I was watching one of your reels, it really resonated with me. You were talking about how to shoot these videos like a one take, no edit situation, and which part of me, I was like, oh my gosh, who has time to do anything else? Like all my videos are like one take or whatever. But somebody, and then you talked about people saying, well, I always say, or, filler words. And you said, oh my gosh, you could actually take a minute to pause and, think. And I was like, what a great point. You could do that. Instead of using all those filler words, you could actually just pause and think, because I think those filler words are oftentimes, they're filling the space for us to allow us to think. So I'm actually going to put that into practice. in my own life, because I know that I do use a lot of filler words. And I use all my likes and Valley Girl, like, oh my God, totally. But the other thing that I think is that I really want to talk about is, because I think it's a much bigger conversation, and to me, this is kind of the gist of your entire work. Maybe you can tell me if that's right or wrong, but acting with agency and not fear. Because before we brought you on, Aaron and I were talking, and he was like, you know, you show up on social media a lot. Like, are there things that you don't share? Do you have boundaries? Do you have certain things? And absolutely I do. There are huge parts of my life that you will never see. I mean, one day I was actually talking to someone that knows me from social media, and I referenced my kids, and they're like, you have kids? Like, yes, I do. That's actually probably the biggest part of my life. But people on social media may actually have no idea, because that's a line that I've drawn in the sand that I won't share. And it's not, and I think the reason why I'm using that example is because sometimes I question it, like, should I share more about my family? Should I? But I'm like, I don't want to, for very specific reasons, security reasons, et cetera, et cetera. It has never been the reason of, I'm so scared what people will think of me, you know? So I wanted to focus on this because I think, one, I feel like you've given me permission to be like, yes, you can be authentic and still not share every single thing. But as long as you're doing it out of agency and not fear, right?
For the people who can't see what I'm doing while Holly's speaking, it's a vehement nod in the yes direction toward what she's saying, and I really appreciate this, because something I always tell my clients is, in fact, please do not share 100% of you, your heart, your brain, your story. We've done nothing to deserve it. And it's citing a little bit of Brene Brown's work of like, what is true vulnerability? And vulnerability is earned. You know, it is not, I'm an open book. Because what you'll find is the people you'll meet who are open books, they are the people who, at their core, are trying to control the narrative most. Because what they're really saying is like, skeletons in my closet. Absolutely not. Like, come into my house. I've taken the doors off of all of my closets. You can see, check under the beds. It's like, right. Queen, I get it. Like, you have nothing to hide, because what they're hoping for is that you never find out anything about them that they haven't controlled or expressed first, so that they never can be hurt. It's a preemptive defense mechanism. However, I think people who are like, I feel very similarly, right? I feel like folks who are constructing personal brands online that are truly honest and authentic in the smartest way that also ensures longevity, avoids burnout, etc., is my audience feels like they know me deeply, and that is by design. And there are still so many things and huge sections of my life that I don't bring up, either because I don't really think to, which is some sort of an indication that it doesn't need to be in the current conversation, and or this isn't for you. This is unprocessed trauma, or this isn't my story to share. For any number of reasons, and I work with a lot of moms, and the conversation of kids comes up a lot, and I really wonderfully, and I will totally brag about my clients all the time, everyone comes in with such level-headed thoughts on this. It's never like I've had to be like, well, we should really be concerned about your safety, right? Like people get it, especially the folks I'm working with who have potentially larger accounts. But this idea of agency as opposed to fear, like you zoomed in on, in my TEDx talk in 2022, that was actually how I defined authentic versus inauthentic, right? That authentic is this word that we throw around all the time, and I think it actually really lacks a helpful definition, because most people would be like, right, it's being yourself. And as I've already covered earlier, like, no one has any idea who that is, really. Like, with a lot of love and respect. Yes. You don't know. I don't know. Yeah. We're working on it, ever evolving. Yes. But so long as you're not being a version of yourself based off of, oh my God, what will they think? How will I be perceived? I would say that you're acting with intention and purpose, and you are being a version of yourself by choice. That's authentic to me. So I'm in agreement 100%.
Okay, so my next question for you was going to be, how do you know when you're being authentic versus not authentic? And, as I was listening to some of your content, of course, the natural tendency is to sort of like in real time apply it to my life and what I'm doing. And I'm like, Yeah, like there's not too many pictures of me like, getting out of bed in the morning. I mean, most of the time I do have makeup on, not all the time, but of course on the podcast, like hair and makeup is done. It's like, is that authentic? Like, so how do you know how do we know? How do we define it? I mean, you kind of already touched on it, but let's talk more about it.
No, I think this is really important. One of the less helpful ways of knowing, but potentially more helpful because you can just do it in your head, is I think regardless of how you are being, authentic versus inauthentic, the end result is tired, right? We expend energy, we get tired. However, I think that tired, which I'm being really reductive on purpose, feels very different. Are you completely exhausted because the day was filled with things that you love and you were in flow, and I have 2 clients back to back, and then I do a podcast interview, and then I'm going to go to the gym, and then I have a voice lesson, and it's just all these things that I feel like, do we curse on here? Can we curse? Do you curse?
Yes.
Or we can also,
yes, because we keep it authentic, Justin.
Baby, I love it. But I've been like so good. I've been such a little Puritan boy in my head this whole time. I was like, why are you
just
so
let
buttoned
it flow,
up?
let it flow.
Yes, like if I'm doing things that feel so fucking good for me, at the end of the day, I'm still tired. My head hits the pillow and I'm out, ideally. The other version is depleted, of having literally nothing left. Now, I can hear the people listening to this who are like, but I feel that way because I'm deeply introverted. And I'm like, that also might be true, right? Everybody needs some version of refueling. But did you spend that day, and I try to be very careful when I leverage this term, but masking, because it really does come from the neurodivergent community, and I don't want to like deeply appropriate and make it so common, but that is the term and the idea of the sort of, however thin it is, facade through which you're expressing yourself to make yourself more palatable and tolerable to others. That is existing, in my estimation, outside of your values. That, to me, is existing outside of whatever the code inside your body you were supposed to live inside of. That is completely depleting in a way that the other version of exhaustion just doesn't feel like, because you might be tired at the end of the day, but you're filled up, and this version is you are empty. You have poured everything out. So one way to check in sort of like, well, who do I feel comfortable around? What events, what scenarios in which do I feel like I can really truly be myself, is sort of run it through that barometer, right? But also to use this moment, in this moment right now, I feel really comfortable with you. Now, again, this is a setting I'm very comfortable in, period. But I also felt permission to ask that question, right? To say if I could curse. I also am doing my best to be like super in my body and feel what I'm feeling. And then, of course, like run it through the filter of like, be a great podcast interview guest, because I also know what that means. But none of it's out of fear. It's out of a deft expertise of me being me. And I think that that's also okay too. It doesn't mean it's false just because I'm really fucking good at being Justin. But I think it does call into question of like, your body knows. Your body always knows. Even if you're thinking, I wouldn't go there. Listen for the whisper, not for the shout. And your body will tell you.
Yeah. Okay. Now, because, yes, I feel very confident about my certain barriers on social media, not posting this or that, but there are things where I'm like, I'm not going to post that because I am afraid of what people will think. So how do we get over that? Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, is that for you related to like, my hair's not zhuzhed, I'm not beat, like I look like I wake up in the morning, or is it other places for you?
No, it's usually, it's actually never that, interestingly enough.
Amazing.
It's always surrounding my actual lifestyle, like material objects. Like I don't, I mean, my kids, for example, are like, Mom, don't flex that, like, I don't want to come across too, whatever. I don't know the word. Because I'm scared, Justin. I'm scared to even talk about it.
I had to ask because it's so much more valuable if you're open to it, to use an example that also the listeners would have a cognition of, and I totally understand that. And I think, if you were my client, we could talk a lot about like, well, Holly, you worked really fucking hard for a lot of what you have, right? And so you'd be like, well, absolutely. And so then we could talk about how any sort of what you have is a product of who you are as a person. They're all just expressions of who you are and the choices you've made. Now, of course, there's a line, right? Like, we don't need to give Real Housewives of Dubai, but we could, you know, like, if you have a bag that you're obsessed with that you bought yourself because you feel like that is a pride that you want to share out loud, I see no problem with it. Let's also just call a spade a spade. You can't be all things to all people, and you're never going to make everybody happy. And something I do love to say is that if you really hope to rub anyone the right way, you're going to have to rub some people the wrong way. And so I think your kids are onto something. It's like, we don't need to be ridiculously ostentatious, just for a sense, out of respect and awareness and whatever.
Yes.
But I live a very nice lifestyle. I am never apologetic for it. My hourly is very high because I work very hard and I'm really fucking good at what I do. And I don't wear any of that with a performative humility, because, like, you bet your ass I've worked so hard to be who I am and be where I am. Now I want to hide it. And again, there's certain things that I would never share and certain things that you might never share. But if there's something that makes you really happy, or you can afford a certain experience or whatever, and sharing part of that with your audience is important to you for a reason. And of course, a conversation that's lengthier would have me get to know what that is so that I could help you to toe that line more efficiently for yourself in the future. Fucking go for it. But I do understand the fear of people are totally going to think X, Y, or Z about me. And at the end of the day, you've put that story into their heads. We have no evidence typically to prove that that is actually what they're thinking, because as you've already told me, you haven't shared those things. So none of this is true.
Right. Interesting. Huh. Yeah. Okay. So we're just crafting our own stories about these things that probably most of the time never come to fruition.
And even if they do, like, I, you know, we didn't share this explicitly, but I'll share it just because I think it's important to know my backstory. My sister passed away 10 years ago in a car accident. Yes. And it does, I mean, true traumatic loss. And I don't mean to be like, and only that kind of loss, but I mean, real deep pain changes a person. And at the end of the day, sometimes I'll say to my clients, like, and it will not kill you. It might be uncomfy. It really might be for a small amount of time. And those troll comments, you're not going to die. You're going to be okay. And that isn't me like playing this like dead sister card constantly, because that's really not who I am. But I am the person who's like, we get one go round here. If you're not going to make those decisions because you're afraid of what people might say, you're letting everybody else live your life for you. I'm not personally okay with that. Are you?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think those types of experiences, those you know, tragic events, they give you perspective. And so, yeah, I definitely understand that. And that's very true. It won't kill us. Okay, I had a question. What was it? Oh, yes. Okay. So on this topic of, you know, we fear what people might say, think, judge, all that kind of stuff. Is there, because I'm sure you've probably seen it online too, where I feel like I've seen people who they have taken that to such an extreme, like they are trying to do things that are just so controversial and so offensive, like, you know, almost like just they're taking the same concept but on the other side of the spectrum. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about there is, again, I referenced this phrase earlier, but clickbait and or shock factor. I've also worked with creators in the past when I was doing more like a la carte one-on-one sessions or like one-offs, where I would say to somebody like, look, in the audit of your account, and I watched a lot of your content, yeah, I've seen you at both ends of the spectrum. I have seen you full sobbing, and I've seen you catatonic. I have no idea who you are when you're just sort of like on a Wednesday. Yeah. And I was like, that's so fascinating to me that's the scariest place for you to exist. Like, not at the deepest end or the most shallow end of the pool, but just like right in the middle. Right. And I think for what it's worth, that's a manifestation after working with truly like thousands of people at this point. Well, who would care when I was there? Who would care about me on a Wednesday? And I'm like, you'd be shocked, because also everybody thinks who would care about me on a Wednesday. So the people who are courageous enough to show up and be like, y'all have no idea what I do on Wednesdays, and talk about it, they really do get to reap the benefits and the rewards of what that public building in public does. Just this morning, I was washing dishes, and like cleaning my apartment is one of the first things I do in the morning, because that is when my body wants to do it. Like, again, significant ADHD, depression, anxiety, all of it, but like super well managed, and like, he's fine. But like, time blocking, not my thing. Prioritization, not my thing. Identifying what's a high leverage task, I don't know her. But energy management in my body, I'm incredible at. And for other people. It's why I'm so good with my clients, because I just feel very deeply. And in the morning, cleaning feels cathartic. It feels good. Do not ask me to do it any other time of day. It won't happen. But so I just shared on screen, like a text on screen reel, and something about like, you know, time blocking doesn't work, but listening to my body changed everything. You think you need these new systems, but instead you actually just need to stop fighting against your natural impulses, and blah, blah, blah. And it like popped off right away, because people just felt seen. They felt like I had expressed something that maybe in their head was this like 2 pages. I always reference, do you remember the episode of Friends where Rachel makes the trifle but the 2 pages are stuck together?
Yes.
It's like I'm just unsticking the pages and sort of revealing something to them that they always felt but had never articulated before. And that's just because I decided to show up on a Wednesday, right? And so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think it's people who are just completely missing the point. And at the end of the day, like those stars that burn really bright, they burn out fast, and then they create these like vacuous black holes. So we'll see who's here in a year or two.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. What is something that we could all do today in an effort to be more authentic and to show up in a more authentic way?
Yeah, I think I'll speak to something I've experienced with a lot of real people around me. How many things are you just completely okay with that you're completely not okay with? I meet so many adults who are just so deeply unfulfilled by so many aspects of their life. And I acknowledge that there's a certain level of privilege here, and you know, we all come from different backgrounds, et cetera, but there are certain things that, although you think they are non-negotiable, they truly are. You might not be ready for the consequences of ditching that thing, or saying no to that thing, or wanting to do the hard work required to replace that thing, but those places where you are unfulfilled, or you are actively fighting against what your body wants to do, or what you can feel is right, is sucking the life out of you. And so if there's one thing you could do today, is sort of take an inventory of, wow, that is not a good friend for me. I've kept them a lot. Maybe once upon a time we grew apart, but now I have to like bend over backwards to inhabit this mold to be my part in this friendship, and it sucks, and I don't get anything from it. It is hard. That's a friendship breakup that has to happen, right? And that's a singular example. I'm not saying these are just easy decisions to make, nor is the audit easy enough to do if you want to be really candid and transparent with yourself. But also, I've said this before in my content, the hardest part about self-healing is it's actually not mandatory. There's nothing obligatory about...
Oh, mic drop on that.
Boom.
Dang, it's not mandatory. You have to choose to endure that pain.
Yes, otherwise you're going to just endure the pain that you're not even choosing, and that's fucking blows. So it's like, at least choose the pain, right?
Right,
Yeah,
choose
pick
your
poison.
hard.
Yes, choose your hard. And yeah, self-healing is not obligatory, and no one's going to make you do it.
So I absolutely love that. I'm writing it down. But I also think, in my experience, I feel like life, if you don't do it, life continues to pound on that lesson until you succumb and you do it and you surrender and you're like, I have no choice. Like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I got to look deeper into this. I have to like figure out what's going on. Do you agree with that?
I do, and at the same time, there's an assumption being made that eventually you succumb and let it wash over you, and there are people that do not. They will be served the lesson again and again and again on different platters that look different and are shaped different. And but we do all get our lesson, and I think something that I've really taken in stride over the last 3 years of building my business, and we're like majorly scaling this year, and I am so incredibly unapologetically ambitious for what I want out of this experience and where I want to go. But my God, I've made some mistakes that have been painful and expensive, and I just do my best to okay, wow. And like sort of like take that in and make it a part of me and what I do going forward. And also, I don't know how into astrology you are, but part of my chart is I am somebody who needs to experiment. I am somebody who needs to fail really big on his own to know it doesn't work. And so I am very used to being served the lessons, and I have had to embrace a certain level of surrender, like you say, which again is not easy, but I would agree it is the way.
Right. I love that. Okay, and for my final question, Justin Schuman, what does human better mean?
I think it's this beautiful amalgam of everything we've been talking about, where I think you are capable of functioning in life in a way that is efficient and more seamless, and where you have impact and power with less effort. But it does require making yourself more aerodynamic and trimming and cutting off what doesn't work for you. And so I think to human better is to flow through life in a way that is guided by what the fuck you want, in the way that you want to achieve those things, casting off what does not fit just because somebody else tells you it's yours.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here today. You dropped so many gems. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
I've got just a little bit more to say. One of the most mic drop moments from Justin was his statement that self-healing is not mandatory. But as we've talked about before, it's really the only path forward. It's the way to live the most meaningful and deeply fulfilling life. And so, yes, it's not mandatory, but life will serve you up those lessons time and time and time again until you learn how to resolve them within yourself. And of course, I know that everybody watching this is working on yourselves. We're all working on ourselves because we are all made for more.